Norfolk Navy Yard, May 1943. The fog comes first, the thick salts, wheat air that hides everything beyond the edge of the quay. Then slowly a shape emerges. A grey military transport steel hull, sweating with condensation deck, crowded with motionless men. The ship's horn groans once startling gulls into flight. A U.S. harbor patrol boat signals the all clear. Dock hands tighten lines, boots thudding against wet boards. An audience of uniformed Americans waits behind the customs shed. Naval police, medics, typists, photographers. They expect prisoners, exhausted and defiant, perhaps dangerous. What pours out of the transport looks more like ghosts. The German soldiers had been captured in North Africa only weeks earlier. Sand still clings to their boots. Sun has burned their necks raw, but the shock on their faces now has little to do with fatigue. Rubber-tired cranes move along the waterfront in synchronized arcs, lifting cargo crates large as houses. The air vibrates with the deep engine hum of victory, the rhythm of a nation already armed beyond imagination. Corporal Wilhelm Shaner, 20 years old, mother's photo in his breast pocket, watches the scene with disbelief. The last thing he remembers before surrender was chaos. A broken field radio, a handful of ammunition, the certainty that Germany would somehow reverse its luck. He had been told that America lagged behind, a mongrel country unable to fight except with machines cobbled together by others. But here, standing at the mouth of this enormous harbor, every myth begins to corrode. A steam crane swings overhead, hauling a Sherman tank onto another ship bound eastward. Sparks rain from welders' torches. Forklifts glide past in perfect choreography. No one shouts. Orders travel instead by gesture, nod practiced economy. The efficiency itself feels military, almost spiritual. A gum-chewing dock guard gestures with casual authority. "Line up there, fellas." The English words slice through the morning haze. They are not balked with hate. They sound almost courteous. Wilhelm glances at his comrades. Each wears the black-painted letters PW stenkled across the back of the faded grey coat. Enemy property, yet the guards treat them more like exhausted labourers than trophies. On the next pier, a brass band rehearses a march for a departing Liberty ship. The tune carries clear and absurdly cheerful trumpets echoing across metal and water. The prisoners shift uneasily, the irony unspoken welcome music at the edge of captivity. They are herded into columns toward a waiting passenger train. Everything gleams. Rail lines stretch into infinity. The steam locomotive hisses a clean, confident rhythm that feels almost mocking. America runs on this. Whispers one guard to another, unaware the prisoners catch the words. For Wilhelm, the sound cuts deeper than any insult. He can't stop imagining the factories required to maintain it all. The oil fields, the rolling mills, the coal trains crossing a continent larger than Europe itself. He wonders how Germany can conquer a nation that produces abundance as casually as breathing. One of the men near him mutters in disbelief, "They have no ruins." It's true. Every building stands intact, windows unboarded, roofs whole. To soldiers raised among propaganda posters of soft, decadent Americans, the reality feels impossible. The sergeant leading them pauses by the gangway to check his clipboard. "You'll get fed once you're aboard." "Keep to your car," he says simply. His calmness borders on arrogance, the easy confidence of someone who knows total logistical control. August brings the smell of coffee from a canteen hut. Even the scent is overwhelming. Wilhelm hasn't smelled coffee in months, actual beans, not roasted barley. It seems to symbolize the difference between worlds, one struggling to survive, the other inventing comfort amid war. As the prisoners climb into the train cars, they glimpse the harbor one last time. Lines of Liberty ships stretch toward the bay mouth, each hull loaded with trucks, shells, food, an armada of potential. In the far distance, American flags ripple in fog-filtered sunlight. Expectation collapses there on the threshold. Back home, they believe they served a flawless superpower, that Germany alone possessed science and discipline to dominate modern war. Here, standing under a forest of cranes and wires, they confront a terrifying thought. Maybe they have stepped not just onto foreign ground, but into the real epicenter of the century. Inside the rail car, as the door clanks shut, Wilhelm presses his palm to the wooden wall. The vibration of heavy industry pulses through it, the same rhythm he felt from the dock, the same mechanical heart beating across the continent. He whispers a few words no one can hear. Maybe this is how empires sound before they rise. Outside the train whistles once. Twice, smoke drifts upward, merging with the fog that hides the sea. America, still unseen beyond those first impressions, begins to reveal its power, not through boasting, but through motion itself. The train pulled inland through a country that seemed to have no end. Farmland rolled into valleys, valleys into factory towns, roofs shining beneath the morning haze. In each station, where the locomotive refueled, new fragments of the American war machine appeared. Flat cars stacked with jeeps under canvas covers, tank treads strapped with chains, refrigerated cars labeled meat for the front. The rhythm never paused. It was as if the entire landscape breathed in unison with the engine. These were not the ruins of Europe. No bomb scars, no ration queues, no blackout curtains. To the prisoners watching through iron slats, America looked untouched, vast, steady, and it worked. The shock of it rivaled defeat itself. They had sailed believing they were the world's most modern soldiers. Within a few hours on American soil, that certainty wavered. Their journey traced a single strand of a colossal system. By mid-1943, the United States had become the largest custodian of Axis prisoners. On Earth, ships from North Africa arrived weekly, each offloading captured Germans, Italians, and a scattering of Romanians and Austrians. They were processed at coastal forts Norfolk, Newport News, Charleston, then dispersed into an unseen map of captivity. 500 and more camps tucked into America's interior. The strategy was practical. The War Department needed hands. With millions of Americans overseas, farms and railways suffered labor shortages. Prisoners could harvest, build, and repair under the terms of the Geneva Convention. It was efficiency disguised as mercy. For the Germans, those first weeks were a continuous lesson in what industrial democracy could accomplish when united by purpose. Even their own imprisonment was proof of American organization. Every mile they traveled, a clerk somewhere logged rations and rail schedules. Every small town that hosted a base received directives by telegraph before the trains arrived, everything synchronized. Wilhelm Schäner would remember that more vividly than any speech. The camp that awaited them lay hundreds of miles from the coast on land so ordinary it seemed harmless flat pasture bordered by pines. Yet by the time they reached it, fences and guard towers already stood completed, barracks ready, kitchens stocked. Many Americans didn't even realize such installations existed nearby until they saw the convoys passing gray uniforms glimpsed between slats, the white PW catching sunlight. Posters in town shops announced, "Enemy prisoners do not fraternize." Housewives whispered curiosity. Anyway, most had never seen a German outside of newsreels. Inside the fenced compound, daily life began with whistle blasts, revelette at dawn, roll call, breakfast of oatmeal sweetened with molasses, work details left in trucks escorted by calm but armed guards. Night music from mesh hall radios drifted through the barracks, swing ballads, the measured comfort of a civilization unafraid of sound after dark. The prisoners learned rules quickly. No salute required beyond discipline. Letters home permitted once a month. Parcels inspected but delivered intact. The rations shocked them most. Hot meat, vegetables, bread soft enough to compress between fingers, luxuries unthinkable in bombed Europe. Germany's propaganda had promised a starving America, crumbling under debt. In reality, their captors produced food in such volume that even enemies ate well. Wilhelm's first letters betrayed this disbelief. The Americans build as fast as they fight, he wrote carefully, avoiding any phrase that censorship might strike. He described trains running to the minute, planes overhead every dawn, factories glowing at night. Their order is not forced, he added. It grows from pride. The phrase puzzled him even as he wrote it. For Americans working the docks or guarding the camps, this efficiency felt ordinary. They rarely sensed they were displaying the moral heart of their nation to their captives. But to the prisoners, men taught to measure value by conquest, the silent productivity of the United States became a living lecture. Even leisure reflected abundance. At night, the guards played baseball inside the outer yard, while the Germans watched, marveling at uniforms issued only for sport, energy wasted for pleasure. No army that indulges such games could survive, one prisoner muttered. The others, studying the precision of the pitch and swing, suspected otherwise. News from Europe arrived in fragments. Allied landings, bombing raids, the uncertain fate of their families. Yet each announcement was accompanied by the calm continuation of American life that contrasts the frantic reports from the old world and the slow predictability of the new cut sharper than any rebuke. When August heat settled over the plains, the prisoners worked felling pine for camp expansion. Guard details brought thermos jugs of cool water, offering refills. Without sarcasm, men who had once shouted Heil now said, "Thank you," in careful English, each syllable an admission that manners could be stronger than ideology. Around them, the American war machine remained invisible but omnipresent. Trucks on highways, smokestacks on the horizon, the pulse of turbines. They realized they were not confined by the fence but by awe. The enemy's strength was not only its weaponry, but its calm confidence and unshakable faith in production and order. That understanding became the hinge of everything that followed the slow revolution inside the minds of captives. It began on the dock at Norfolk and deepened with every whistle, every warehouse, every perfectly timed train. America's military power was not merely the sum of its guns. It was organization turned into national identity. Outwardly, the Germans remained soldiers awaiting repatriation. Inwardly, they began to question what kind of civilization could wield power without brutality. For many, the answer would change them more than defeat ever could. The stage was now set for the moment when industrial might and human humility met face to face the events that would define them. Captivity beyond numbers or maps. The first autumn of captivity settled over the interior camps with crisp mornings and long blinding afternoons. The fields around the compound ripened into a rust-cold sea. Inside the wire, discipline remained strict but not cruel. Inspections at dawn, fatigue duty until sunset, frost-rimmed silence by night. The prisoners worked harvesting lumber and salvaging metal from train yards, tasks chosen as much to occupy their minds as to aid production. For many Germans, the hardest blow was not confinement but exposure to the enormity of American strength. They expected decay, revenge, resentment. Instead, they saw order without fear. The guards enforced rules yet joked with each other. Officers carried notebooks rather than whips. Power here did not scream, it functioned. One morning during equipment repair duty, Wilhelm Schäner watched a convoy of heavy trucks grind up the service road. The vehicles, brand new, gleamed beneath coats of olive paint. Each carried a white star flanked by smaller supply codes. As they halted, an American lieutenant hopped down, checked his clipboard, then gave sharp, unhurried directions that rippled through the column like well-rehearsed choreography. Wilhelm murmured to the man beside him, "Otto, they even command with calmness." Otto only shook his head. A calm army is the most dangerous. That afternoon, workmen unloaded engines stamped with serial numbers in endless sequence. The monotony hypnotized the prisoners. It was the visible machinery of victory, endless replacement, infinite supply. They had heard rumors from captured Allied soldiers about this industrial miracle, but rumor could not prepare them for the sight of factories that simply never stilled. Weeks later, a dozen chosen men, including Wilhelm, were transferred to assist on the outskirts of such a factory. The army called it Plant 17, though locals knew it as the backbone of the aircraft industry. Under armed supervision, they stacked lumber, cleaned tools, and cleared rail spurs for outgoing freight. What they witnessed dwarfed any pride left from the Reich's boastful film reels, hangars large enough to swallow cathedrals, cranes lifting bomber fuselages like toys, women and men in identical coveralls, riveted wings under fluorescent light that never dimmed, the air inside wire of oil and invention. Even the language of work was different. Foremen addressed workers by name. Laughter mixed with the hammer of rivets. When Wilhelm dropped a sheet of aluminum, expecting insults, an American mechanic simply handed it back and clapped his shoulder. "No harm done, pal." The word pal stayed lodged in his mind. He had never been a pal to anyone outside his regiment. During a lunch break, he overheard two American welders arguing about baseball scores, casual, unguarded, in the middle of a war that might decide the planet's fate. Their confidence came not from arrogance but belief that they would outlast any storm. That shitey frightened him more than any weapon. At the end of each shift, the prisoners loaded scrap into rail cars. On one trip back to the camp, the truck passed a rail junction where streams of freight met like flowing rivers. Boxcars joined troop transports. Tank engines mixed bread deliveries. Everything moved in motion without chaos. The guards offered the men coffee from battered thermos flasks, warm and bitter. "Hard to figure," said Otto quietly. "They fight with kindness." Soon, letters exchanged between prisoners began reflecting a strange admiration. Censors saw it too. and left most of it uncut. It served propaganda better than lies ever could. The people are strong, calm, and well-fed. They do not fear even their officers. They work constantly, but without hatred. The letters carried fragments of truth that no Axis morale officer back home could undo. Inside the camp, small gestures deepened the lesson. Guards brought newspapers encouraging prisoners to practice English. A camp commandant organized a debate about democracy versus totalitarianism, surprising even the Americans with his open invitation. At first, Germans scoffed. Later, curiosity replaced scorn. They began to ask questions, not to challenge, but to understand. One evening, the electricity failed after a storm. The entire compound dimmed to blackness. For a moment, it resembled home Europe, plunged into darkness to hide from bombers. Old reflexes returned. Men froze, expecting orders to run. Instead, American soldiers fetched lanterns and flashlights, stepping calmly through mud to check fuses. Within an hour, the lights returned. No panic, no shouting, only quiet repair. Several prisoners exchanged glances. It was as if this nation had forgotten how to fear. News from the front arrived like waves. Rome liberated, then Paris, then reports of German cities burning. Radio men translated bulletins with clinical precision. The prisoners heard their world collapsing through static. Guards offered no triumphal smiles. They simply continued distributing supper trays, discipline without cruelty. The contradiction gnawed until respect became unavoidable. Winter set in with sleet and wind that whistled through pine fences. Inside the barracks, some men carved toys or built benches from scrap wood. Wilhelm carved a model crane the same shape as the first machine he saw at Norfolk. When finished, he placed it on a shelf near the stove. "That is America," Otto said, always lifting something heavier than it should. By spring of 1945, change ran deeper than admiration. It was acceptance. They no longer imagined a miracle reversal of the war. The men who had once served under banners of destiny now studied the civility that conquered them, the dignity of a system that trusted its own people, the anonymity of collective strength. For every prisoner who still clung to ideology, there were two who looked at the guards and thought, "This is how nations endure." When the factory produced its last wartime aircraft, the Germans assigned there were allowed to watch the test flight. The plane climbed into clear sky, silver in the sun, a brief reflection of technological command carried by faith rather than fanaticism. Wilhelm stood transfixed. "We dreamed of ruling the air," he whispered. They simply built it. That night, back inside the compound fence, the sound of engines still echoed in his ears, a haunting mixture of dread and admiration. America had introduced a new kind of power, one that neither fear nor propaganda could explain. Quiet strength, that was the phrase that spread among captives. A power so disciplined it didn't need display, so vast it could afford decency. After years of slogans and salutes, the realization humbled them completely. The reversal was complete. They had arrived expecting primitive abundance and moral decay. They found precision, order, and humanity sustaining each other like gears in a single machine. What remained was to see how such revelation would shape their lives when the war ended, and what it would mean for the century waiting beyond the fence. The radio crackled through the morning of May 8, 1945. Inside the camp, prisoners and guards alike gathered around loudspeakers set up near the mesh hall. The voice of an American announcer, Tenny, through the static, declared victory in Europe. For a heartbeat, the sound dissolved into silence. No cheers, no celebration, just wind stirring through pine trees, and the slow realization that the war shaping every heartbeat of their lives had ended. Some of the Germans stood with heads bowed. Others stared blankly at the horizon, their minds half a world away. One man removed his cap and whispered, "It is finished." Though his voice held no anger, Wilhelm Schäner felt both lighter and older, as though time had folded on itself. The world he had been trained to protect no longer existed. The world before him seemed greater than imagination. Within days, orders arrived to begin repatriation. The camp buzzed with mixtures of longing, fear, and reluctant gratitude. Men who had cursed their guards now spoke to them like neighbors. Some even shook hands, uncertain if forbidden. The Americans allowed it. On the morning of departure, the prisoners loaded onto the same type of trains that had first carried them inland 2 years earlier. The air smelled of both diesel and spring magnolia. When Wilhelm climbed aboard, Sergeant Harris, the young guard who had once supervised their lumber detail, was waiting near the steps. "You'll be back on the water tomorrow," Harris said. "A long way home." Wilhelm nodded. "Home," he repeated, uncertain whether the word still meant a place or only a memory. He reached into his pack, retrieved the small carved crane he had made months before, and offered it silently. Harris hesitated, then took it carefully. "Keep building things," he said. "That's what we do here." The train pulled away. Through the narrow window, Wilhelm saw the camp receding, a neat maze of barracks, fences, and gardens they had planted for exercise. It looked orderly, peaceful. Even the guard tower seemed less a symbol of control than of balance. At the harbour, cargo cranes once again filled the skyline, the same steel giants that had greeted them in 1943. Now they stood not as instruments of shock, but of respect. The prisoners lined up by nationality, their paperwork processed with the same clean efficiency that had marked every American undertaking. No taunts, no humiliation, only names read from a roster and firm handshakes that confirmed the war was in truth over. As Wilhelm waited to board, he admired the steady tide of activity around him. Dock workers unloading food for Europe's starving cities, U.S. Navy crews preparing ships for the Pacific, Red Cross volunteers distributing letters and soap. The machine of war had already turned toward rebuilding, and the speed of the transformation astonished him. He realized that what he had mistaken for brutality in American order was resilience. An empire maintained by fear collapses when fear esps. A democracy fueled by purpose adapts. On deck, the prisoners watched the coastline shrink into haze. Some tried to sing, but the words faltered. Others simply leaned against the rails, eyes wide to the horizon, as if they could absorb this final lesson. Power built upon cooperation is quieter but infinitely stronger than power driven by obedience. When their ship approached Europe weeks later, the night horizon revealed faint flashes, fires smoldering and bombed German ports. A few men clenched their fists in grief. Wilhelm did not. He remembered the cranes of Norfolk, the factories alive with music, the guards unafraid of laughter. That was the image he would carry into whatever rebuilding awaited him. After demobilization and slow years of transition, many former prisoners wrote back to the communities that had confined them. Letters in careful English crossed the Atlantic. "We learned more of discipline and fairness than we believed possible. Some sent gifts, hand-carved toys, textiles, small tokens of thanks. A few returned to visit, wander the grounds where Wire once stood, and describe to townspeople how those months changed their understanding of civilization." Historians later called this transformation re-education by example. It was never formal, never preached. It happened quietly in warehouses, on ball fields, in calm voices explaining why rules were followed without hatred. The deepest lesson taught inside those fences was not military but moral, that efficiency can coexist with decency and strength with mercy. Wilhelm found work decades later in Bremen's renewed port. The cranes that rose over the docks reminded him of Norfolk, of that first quiet morning when power had revealed itself in motion rather than menace. He would tell his son, "Our generation learned what greatness means by losing to it." The story of those German prisoners is not one of surrender alone. It is the human moment when ideology met evidence. Men who had grown up believing domination was virtue discovered a nation that prospered through cooperation, inclusion, and the relentless rhythm of free work.